Dr. Diana, you have such a full and long bio, right? Because you're extremely accomplished. I'm going to make the bio brief, but I just want to really jump into this, if you don't mind, because, you know, folklorist, visual artist, curator. You're with Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, a professor. You've done groundbreaking work, and that's what we're going to get into. Please, my first question, your journey. How did you get into folklore? What introduced you? What was your journey?
Well, it's funny because I always tell people that I fell into folklore backwards. Because I started out as a visual artist. Well, I started out actually being interested in design, in fashion design.
Okay.
And, you know, when I was really little, I went to, when I was 5 months old, as a matter of fact, my parents were in the States. They were actually immigrants from Barbados and Guyana, and they were working. And you know how folks send their kids down south to be with the grandparents?
Yes.
Well, I got sent to Bermuda because that was where the elders in my family were.
Wow.
And while my dad was in school and my mom was working and that kind of thing. So, so that was like my first school, my first birthday, all of that took place in Bermuda. And so when I came to the States, back to the States, to New York, to Brooklyn, it was like, that was my first kind of cultural, I want to say disruption, but it was like, you know, I was a stranger in a strange land, but at the same time, you know, there was, you know, I had a lot to learn. And I think that that's important in terms of the journey, because that was the whole thing where I started to think, oh, well, people eat different stuff. And, you know, the kind of traditions of my family were slightly different, but we were all Black people, you know.
Right.
And at that time, you know, you were either Black or white, or you were in that category, people said Oreo. And I knew I wasn't Oreo. I knew I wasn't white. So, but then there was things that you know, I didn't really understand. And I think that the journey towards folklore started with noticing that the family, that there was a lot of, I guess, diversity in the Black community.
Right.
Like some people, you know, ate some kind of foods, and some other people ate other kind of foods, you know. And so this kind of was a question in the back of my mind all the time. And as I said, I really, really loved making things from the time I was really little.
Right.
And so the only kind of making stuff that I really learned, because the elders in my family, they always had a needle and thread with them, you know.
Okay.
And there was this place, Mrs. Francis Sewing School, that I went to, and, you know, and so that was really natural for me. And the only thing that I thought of, okay, was, well, with fashion design, you know, I made my own clothes and, you know, that kind of thing.
Wow.
All the way up through high school. And this is all relevant to folklore, by the way.
No, I know it is. I know it is.
So my mom had a dry cleaning store, and I was the repair lady. My mom said, you know, you have to work after school. You have to, you know, everybody had their role.
Right.
And so I used to like take up hems and men busted zippers and that kind of stuff. And then I got the opportunity when I was in high school to work with Zelda Wynne Valdez, who was an amazing couturier, Black couturier. She had a shop on 57th Street, which in Broadway, and she did things like she was on the cover of Life because she did Eartha Kitt's Paris wardrobe. Now, Eartha Kitt is going to Paris, which is a place supposedly of high fashion, and she sewed her entire wardrobe to go to Paris. She sewed for Gladys Knight and the Pips. She sewed Mae West's first sequin gown, and she invented the bunny, the Playboy bunny outfit.
Wow.
So, but when she retired, she went to her first retirement. She went to a place called HARUAC, which was an arts and culture program for young people. And as I said, I had the good fortune to be one of her students there. And so that was where, I learned a lot about design. I learned a lot about fashion. We had to make our own collections, all of that stuff. So, but then my parents were worried about me going into the Seventh Avenue design world and all that kind of stuff. So they said, no, you can get a liberal arts degree. And I remember specifically, then you can be a garbage collector, but you got to go to college. You got to go. So I went to school. They didn't have fashion because I wasn't in the art program. And so I ended up taking anthropology because I figured that way I could learn about the clothing of the world.
Right.
And,
wow.
And, at the time, art history might have been something, but they didn't teach anything about Black people in art history.
I just have to tell you, about 4 things on the list that I wanted to talk to you about, you've already brought up already. So this is going well. So
yeah.
Let me ask, there's a couple of things that I want to touch on. Just based on what you just said, right? One, the fact that one of the things that I want to touch on that you already mentioned, the quote unquote Black culture, tradition, behavior, expression is not monolithic, right?
Exactly.
2, there is a trajectory of tradition of Blacks in the space of dry cleaning, tailor, fashion, and things of this nature, right?
That's right.
And the way you went about it is where I would like you to start, and then try to intertwine those other things in.
Okay.
You had the brilliant idea, because what it sounds like, you said you came into it backwards, but you understood that our discipline, the many methods, right, and departments of our discipline allows the study and research of the purpose of some of these attires. Is this what I'm getting?
Oh yeah. And actually, the reason why I said I came into it backwards, because I did not know that there was such a discipline as folklore when I came into it. I didn't realize that what I was doing was folklore. And it was funny because, let's fast forward a little bit. And my first job as a curator was at a small independent Black museum, no longer exists, called the Muse Community Museum. And I was the curator. We had an executive director, a curator, exhibition director, and then it was something that was put together when the Brooklyn Children's Museum had a temporary home in Brooklyn on Lincoln Place. And then they, when they left, the community said, we want something for us. We want something permanent. So it became the Muse Community Museum of Brooklyn. And it was history as well as arts. And they had amazing people there. They had jazz musicians, like Randy Weston was there. And I mean, all incredible people. And they had a planetarium. there, which was amazing. And they had they had a little animal menagerie, but they also had an exhibition space. And so I think the very first thing that I did when I got there, I got really interested in African American quilting traditions. And this was in 1980, 81. And we did a show called African American Quilt Works, a continuing tradition. Partly because I was a quilter.
Right.
and partly because I had been exposed through my stepmom who had worked in Georgia in the freedom schools and so on, to the tradition from that a lot of people know now as part of G's Bend, but also the African American quilting tradition. And Roland Freeman, have to give him his props because he was the first one to really start interviewing these ladies, and then G's Bend came out of his research.
Ah, okay.
So, and then people started, looking at that. He did a book called Something to Keep You Warm, and it was part of his work. But anyway, so we looked at quilters. There was a quilting group at a senior citizen center in Brooklyn, and there were quilters around, and actually there were folks like Joyce Scott, amazing artist Joyce Scott, and her mother Elizabeth Scott, and Faith Ringgold her mother was alive, and so we had this wonderful conversation between quilters, and they were all there talking about how their art practice was influenced by the work of their mothers. So it was like combining that. And we had also traditional quilters, we had contemporary quilters, Michael Cummings, a lot of folks that people would now recognize in the art world, but also people who were very much in the traditional quilting world. So anyway, and I guess so that was a folklore, or
moment.
folklore,
Yes. Let me ask you a question. Speaking of quilting, those in the tradition of quilting, what quilting means, specifically in this program to African Americans and Black people, but as a whole, I always come back to how the term obscure, I think, is misused in our discipline. And this is definitely, I don't work to critique the discipline at all, but I notice that word is used often. And you stated that today, a lot of these people you mentioned are big in the art world, but yesterday, not so much. They would have been referred to as obscure. Do you think that does a disservice using that term, even though they were carrying on the things passed down to them that was beneficial and actually humongous to their immediate, I guess, folk group for that matter?
Oh yeah. It's like the whole term discover, because discover has usually meant that white folks have become aware of this,
Right.
But actually, the community, there are very much people, who were important in the community, whether it be, in terms of the artists, the community of Brooklyn or Baltimore, or, wherever they were, Harlem for Faith Ringgold, or, but also the women who were the traditional quilters, they were also activists. Many of them were very much involved in the struggle for civil rights, and there were the Freedom Quilters Guild.
Wow.
And what happens is that quilting is also a way that people were able to come together and bond, as well as deal with some of the both the trauma and the joy, the joy of our arts, but also the stuff that was going on, it's a very old practice, and dealing and using fabrics that were around, that were reclaimed from clothing and from scraps and things like that. People were using what they had. And so there were these traditions like quilting for women. There were also woodworking. A lot of the woodworking traditions that African American men had, both in the South and in the Caribbean, these skills were very important to building the places where they were. I said African American craftspeople built America.
Yes, ma'am.
and that gets lost sometimes. But at the same time, they were also building the pews for the church.
Right.
And they were building stuff and they were helping each other out to build homes. Again, very important tradition. I know that there was a tradition in Bermuda where, you would get your buddies to help you to build your house. And then when you were about to get, when they were about to get married, you had to help them build their house, and, it would just go on. And
right.
And the skills were mad skills, and I worry about how with, people moving to the North, sometimes a lot of these skills were lost, or with people right. getting organized. And then there was a time when I guess around the world wars, there were a lot of folks coming in from Poland, from Germany, who also had, skills, and then from Italy, and then Black people got locked out of these trade right. unions and these, guilds and things like that.
That's right.
And then eventually a lot of it got lost. So, I mean, if you hear I'm passionate about this stuff, I think it's so important that we regain this, that we document people who are still involved.
Yes.
And again, coming back to folklore, and document the stories that folks have to tell around these skills and right. these crafts and these art forms.
Right. Well, again, you said a plethora of things that really are hitting home. First, one of the, I was thinking as you were talking about, please correct me if I'm incorrect, a short story I think was written by Toni Morrison, maybe, about the girl who went home and wanted to quilt.
That's right.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. And then when you said our people from the South and the Caribbean, it's so mind-boggling, because I was able to spend a lot of time in the South because that's where my people are from. But I grew up not far from the museum you're talking about on Nostrand Avenue in Crown Heights.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness.
Right. So I used to go there as a child. But the point I'm getting to is the vernacular and dialect of the Carib West Indian is equivalent and extremely reflective of the Southern Black. It is amazing, especially when you listen to blues. So now, I was going to wait to ask you this question, right? But based on what you're describing, I think it's a good time to ask you to share with us what ethno aesthetics is.
Okay, so let me start with aesthetics, okay?
Okay.
So aesthetics is the combination of values and beliefs that have to do with beauty. and it comes out, what do we think is beautiful? What do we think is, what does our community as a whole, what does a group think of as beautiful? And what are the values that people think of when they think of something, an object or something like that that's beautiful? Okay, and ethnoaesthetics is just that different groups, different communities have different senses of what is beautiful. And I guess how I've applied the term is in regard to dress. And so that this is both, it's about different communities have different senses of, what's beautiful, what's appropriate, what values you put on how you dress and how you groom yourself,
Yes.
And getting to the kind of diversity within the African American community, even, and the the large global African community, we have a lot of diversity in there.
Yes,
and
we do.
The thing is that it's both generational. But also, where we come from, what part of the world, what part of the country we come from.
Yes, ma'am.
And they're really, you can get real subtle with this, but you can also get kind of large. And I'm just talking about the Black community. I'm not talking about even the larger American population. Because that's a whole different thing. And we do influence, we do influence everything. But I was thinking about, oh gosh, what's the brother who sings Freedom? New Orleans just came out with this video. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember.
Oh no.
It'll come back to me.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's a good segue while we're trying to remember. Because Zora Neale Hurston is a lot of our favorites, right?
Yes. Yeah, patron saint.
So I think you know where I'm going with this. Based, again, perfect segue, because you were inspired by a line in one of her writings to create an entire project. Could you talk about it? Give us the name first, and then talk to us about it and what inspires you.
Sure. Well, Zora Neale Hurston talked about the will to adorn being, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, being one of the most important parts of African American aesthetic culture. And when she talked about it in a lot of ways. We love to embellish the way we talk. We love to embellish the way we dress. I mean, we adorn all sorts of things. We adorn our music, the way that we do that. So I love the idea, the will to adorn. And so it inspired the project that I've worked on now for about 10 years, the will to adorn and the aesthetics of identity, of African American identity. Because I think that one of the, Zora Neale Hurston was right, obviously. And, we have a lot of different aesthetics. I started asking the question, is there such a thing as an African American aesthetic of dress? And what I realized as we were doing the research, and we initially started in 9 cities, that there are many aesthetics of dress. But the things in terms of the value has to do with asserting our freedom, asserting our identity. And the other thing is that we talk through our dress.
Right.
And everybody from the ladies at church with the beautiful big hats to the young brothers who, now they used to wear their pants sagging.
Yes.
And it changes through time, and it changes through, as I said, through region. But we love to dress. It's a thing for us, and the way we wear our hair. And what is so interesting is I think it's been recognized. There have been, first of all, there were the sumptuary laws.
Right. Could you explain to those who don't know, please?
Okay. There were actually laws passed in the South. I think there were some in New Orleans. There were other places too, where enslaved people were forbidden from dressing as good as well as the people who were enslaving them.
Wow.
And there were laws, for example, with the ladies of New Orleans, the Creole ladies of New Orleans. They said that they couldn't wear their hair out because it was too attractive to the enslaving men, So they came up with these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful head wraps that were just as lovely and elaborate. And so it was a kind of resistance there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that spirit of resistance also exists when during the 70s, when with the Black Power movement, people first started wearing their hair natural and wearing the afro. I mean, that was the first wave. There's another wave now, but that was the first wave. And then when people were wearing, when women were wearing braids, and actually men as well started to wear braids, I mean, it was an assertion of a connection to Africa. It was an assertion of identity, a way of defining ourselves in a way, and defining our beauty in a way that was ours alone. And there were lawsuits that were created to stop women from wearing their hair in braids. There were lawsuits from here. In fact, very recently, even in the Army.
That's what I was about to ask you. Is this recent time?
Yeah, this came up to recent times. And so, there had to be things like the Crown Act, which is an act that is recent legislation that to allow lack of or to forbid discrimination based on hairstyle.
I have to say you're a natural because you bring up legislation. So I have to ask you, considering your work also is predicated to cultural policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Please talk to so the not just the study of, but the, I guess, fight for or activism of cultural tradition allows folklorists into the space of government and legislation?
Exactly. Very, very importantly so. Because tradition, again, the expressive culture is a way of asserting ourselves, a way of self-definition, a way of creating that important space, honoring the Black body, honoring, and honoring the food we eat, all of these things that have to do with maintaining heritage, but also maintaining heritage means maintaining bonds between community, means education of young people. It means honoring elders, but it also, has real consequences for education, for psychology, for dealing with trauma, for dealing with keeping with what I like to call spiritual marronage, because the Maroons were able to from the 17th to the 19th century they were able to get away from slavery, sometimes by going into less accessible places and then fighting for the territory.
Right.
And this happened everywhere. This happened, with the Afro Seminoles. It happened, who also made linkages with Native communities and were able to sustain and even get treaties about not being re-enslaved and that kind of thing. But so that actual marronage was for the ability to govern oneself, to maintain a sense of culture, a sense of religion, a sense of thought that was independent. So how I see it, spiritual marronage is the continuing assertion of identity and affirmation of African American, global African identity, and assertion of those traditions and that knowledge and those stories and that experience that is part of our communal legacy. And folklorists, because we document these stories and because we document these traditions, have a really important role to play. Because this is part of that history. This is part of, if it goes away, it goes away,
Right.
And so in a cultural policy space, it's these things are so important for cultural resilience that they affect all other aspects of life, including, look at the music space.
Right.
That's a big, big space there.
Yes.
And the fact that people are, recognizing jazz as, for instance, as an American music, but where that comes from,
right,
comes out of an African American tradition. These things are important. And if kids don't learn that, they come thinking that they don't have anything.
Right. See, and that's the thing, right? So here's a couple of questions that I ask every Black folklorist of color that I encounter, whether on record or off. Because and the answer is usually either I came into it backwards or I came into it by default. There's a textbook in African American studies written by a brilliant man, The Discipline of African American Studies, right? It breaks down the different disciplines that encapsulates this study: sociology, anthropology, ethnography, psychology, all of these ologies, but folklore is not in it.
Yeah.
My question is the term does the term folklore have a negative connotation to those of the diaspora because it was something that's utilized more by Western civilization? Just the term itself.
Yeah. I think that has been an issue. That has been an issue. Just to put how I did actually end up in folklore there, because I think that that's a thing. Because I think that I was, my bachelor's, my master's, and part of my PhD was in anthropology. By the time I did my PhD, it was anthropology and folklore. But again, didn't know that it existed. A lot of the ways that the word folk is used initially was demeaning, was in a space that, it was utilized in a way that it connoted kind of folks that were, I'm going to say back in a shack, barefoot in a shack, right? You know?
Yeah, backwood. Yeah, primitive. That's the word, primitive. Right.
Exactly. And I think that the way that, you know, the discipline started, it was people looking at those things that are passing away, the folkways. It was not only the art of the people, but it was the art of the poor, backwards people.
Right.
You know, I think that was the connotation, that one of the connotations that people had. The second connotation was that it was only about storytelling, and that it was a storytelling that was kind of a performative storytelling in a way. I mean, a theatrical storytelling. You know, a lot of people think of Zora Neale Hurston as, you know, having a degree in anthropology, but she was actually working as a folklorist.
Right.
And so, you know, there's kind of that muddiness between the fields, but I see, you know, folklore is, could be said to be the anthropology of expressive culture, but could be said to be the study of narrative, you know, and there's all these things here. I think that it's really important for young people to claim folklore as young Black people to claim folklore as a field, and to see all the things that the field has to share, and all the kind of technologies of the discipline. Because there's a lot of richness there. And it's, you know, people like, starting with Zora Neale, but also Catherine Morgan, you know, Children of Strangers, and Gladys Marie Fry, and Beverly Robinson, Gerald Davis, you know, all of these folks who are our ancestors, you know, and who, in the field. I think that their work needs to be a lot more publicized. But I agree, African American folklorist has not gotten the kind of attention that that it should have within African American communities. I mean, Julius Lester, you know, was a folklorist. You know, I mean, there's all these folks. Bill Wiggins. I mean, all of these folks were doing incredible work. So I think it's a matter of, as African American folklorists, us publicizing the field and letting people know more about it, and there's also the thing about which I think is very important, is the idea of community self-documentation.
Just,
you know, teaching that. I think it's important that, you know, that we're teaching it in the schools, but it's important that we're teaching it in the communities too.
Absolutely.
So that's the other thing that I guess has been important to me throughout my career, is making sure that people within communities have the skills to document what's going on, and to make archives, and to make their own, I guess what is called now is autoethnography. I mean, that's one of the terms.
Right. That is the technical method. Now, speaking of community, because you work with Smithsonian Folklife, you worked with a lot of people and organizations. You've done a lot of great work. I just have to say that. I don't know if I say that to you enough. Cultural representation is what we're kind of talking about now. Exactly. And I wanted to ease into this because I'm careful not to, I don't want people who don't have malice in their mythology to think I'm speaking about them. However, it is a noted truth, right? That it is usually the study of Black folk, whether it's in America or across the globe, is predicated in regards to other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's usually the other studying us with a preconceived notion.
Yeah, that's right.
So how did you go about? Because we gotta mention the elephant in the room. You are a woman. You are a Black woman in a space that was really not Black, even when you came into it. And you're pushing for cultural representation, but like they say, folk music is the music by the people. So you're pushing for the voice of the people in a space where it was a whole bunch of others giving their depiction of what they think this is. How was that?
Oh, wow. That's a whole story right there. I think I talked about this, and I'm not going to name some names, but I talked about it a while ago about being told that, first of all, that folks didn't believe in people from the culture representing their own culture because they'd be biased.
I've heard that recently.
Oh, Lord. See that? And, as if the folks from outside the culture are going to be neutral, are going to be, non-biased, which
right.
I mean, I remember when I started the first kind of participatory ethnography or participatory folklore project I did was actually called the African Immigrant Project. And it was a time when people were starting to come over as part of the second diaspora for the first time. And the Cape Verdeans had been there 75 years. I'm talking about what was voluntary or economically driven or migration.
Right.
And folks would come over from the Caribbean as well. But I was really interested in how, what happens in terms of the transfer of culture when folks are coming over on their own and in new communities. And I guess I had a front seat because, I remember when my family came over from the West Indies, and there were things that we brought over, or my family brought over, that and continued with a template from home, a mental template from, home, meaning back in the Caribbean.
Right.
And then my husband was from Senegal, and I was really interested because I saw the same pattern happening there, where, in fact, he was the one who coined the term the vertical village. Like in New York, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time when there were a lot of the Senegalese vendors remember
that.
Okay, and there were a few people, and they would actually live in an apartment, take over one of the SROs downtown.
Yes, ma'am.
And every floor you went to, there was something else. There was the barber. There was the restaurant. There was, a lady who would cook Senegalese food. And then the guys, when they came back from vending, they could have food from home. And she would set up like a pay-per-view TV in the room so that they could see the news from home. But then also they were also doing other things like they would have, many Senegalese, 93% of the Senegalese population is Sufi Muslim. So they would have Thursday evening get-togethers for chanting, religious chants and things like that. Or they would have weddings and, that was when women started to come, they'd have tailors, they'd have all these people in the community that you knew if you were in the community.
Right.
And I said, wow, this is important. And it turns out that it was happening in the various Ethiopian communities, it was happening in the various Nigerian communities, of which there were all many different, ethnic communities within that too. And I said, well, wow, but people need to be documenting this, but need to be documenting it themselves. So the idea was to set up study groups of folks from each community to be able to do that. And oh gosh, there's so many stories about that. But including when I'm working for the Smithsonian, which is a white institution, and I was the only African American folklorist at the center who was employed, on a regular basis. I mean, there's some wonderful people who have worked and continue to work.
Yes,
with the Smithsonian, including Mark Puryear and Phyllis May Machunda. She came before me. She was, and of course the great Bernice Johnson Reagan. I mean, there's incredible Camilla Bright support, a lot of folks. But in terms of the time when I was doing this work, like the first thing I would get was, well, okay, what's this for? What's Smithsonian going to do with our stuff? Why are you doing this? What do you want to get? They want to find out stuff about us, and this is the government. And basically what I had to say, and this has come up again recently too, is that the Smithsonian really does not, as written large, they are not the ones doing this. If it's going to be documented, if you're going to be represented culturally, you're going to have to do it yourselves, or we're going to have to do it ourselves,
Right.
Way that you want to do it. So it's not about that. And it's about gaining those skills and taking that documentation where we need to take it for the community, for the building of the community.
Right.
And for passing it down. And it is the repository that belongs to the entire nation. So it's, it's in trust for, the Smithsonian is an institution that does this documentation in trust. So we have a right to make sure that our stories and our stories as told by ourselves are there.
Right. As told by ourselves, right? Because is placed in the proper context, which leads me to my next question. I know you have to go. I don't want to hold you too long, but I was speaking to I don't remember if she was an archivist or a curator here, and I was looking for something specific. It was a white lady at the archival part of the library here, and she said, unfortunately, not many African Americans give us things to archive or hold, so I wouldn't have much, And I walked away saying to myself, initially, it's a shame, but then I had to think a little bit longer. There has to be a reason why Black folk, for the lack of better, to keep it as broad as possible, don't trust certain institutions with this story.
Yeah, because, the story has gotten distorted so many times, has been told wrong so many times, have been, there's so many instances, even within our field, within folklore, where that has happened. There's been great work done.
Yes.
There are folks who've been very conscientious and who I really think have done wonderful work. And but there's also a lot of distortion and kind of getting the story wrong, or at worst, using it as a way to look at Black people, to exoticize,
right,
and so on. But I think that this is one of the reasons why more more African Americans need to be in the field. And I do have to say that one of my first formal entry into the field in New York was, I was at the Muse, and Robert Barron he was setting up the folk arts program at New York State Council on the Arts, and asked me to come on to help, to help build that department. And I was there for about 5 years, and there haven't been as many people in that space as possible. We ended up doing some really interesting things. First of all, it was a great, and this is my plug for becoming state folklorists and art administrators for, it was a way to see the field as a whole. He made me go through the entire University of Pennsylvania curriculum of folklore and read everything that, I always remember that. And it was really tough, and made me go to AFS, as part of my work, and I have to say that I'm thankful for that, because there was no way I would have known anything about the field formally, in terms of, actually, my stepmom is a folklorist, Mary Diane Baird, and she came into it from the civil rights movement, and that was really important, but in terms of really getting into the field, being at the New York State Council on the Arts was important, not only to see the breadth of the field, but also being in a space to help work with African American community organizations. And we actually were able to put together a conference called the Arts of Black Folk with Schomburg, with my unfortunately deceased colleague Deirdre Bibby. But that conference was seminal. We had we had major African American folklorists there. Some of the people I've mentioned, and one of the things I'm proudest of, there were a lot. There was an organization in the Bronx founded by Madaha Kinsey Lamb, Mind Builders.
You told me about that.
Yeah, well, she, it was a cultural arts program that she had put together for young people in the Bronx. And she came to that conference, and she met Beverly Robinson, Dr. Beverly Robinson there. And she and Beverly Robinson put together the Beverly Robinson folklore. Now I'm going to not remember exactly what it said, but the cultural research internship, which was a way of having young people learn the skills of folklore. And it's still going on. It must be in its 30th year now. But I mean, it's really, really long term. And we also were able to put together a few conferences at the Schomburg on African American culture. And and that, it was supported by New York State Council on the Arts at the time. But those kinds of efforts, we use the institutions that we work with to do the kinds of things that they're equipped to do.
What are some of the things that we could do, and is it realistic for the sustainability of recruiting and keeping African American, Indian, Carib folk into our discipline, whether it's in the public space or the academic space?
I think we need to talk more about the field. We need to be to speak, I guess, as folklorists. I think we need to encourage people to, in those public spaces, to recognize the importance of folklore as a discipline, and that it's not, to recognize that there are other Black people in the discipline, like what you're doing, or people of color, in general. In other words, we need to claim the discipline. So I think that can happen in a lot of different things, in a lot of different ways. What we write, the kind of programs we put together. I really do believe in the idea of participatory research projects, where we're introducing young people or intergenerational people. I mean, with the Will to Adorn, we had programs in churches, we had programs in community centers, we had all sorts of programs in museums, and so introducing the field in that way, as well as in schools. I think that we need to talk more about what the possibilities are, and not hiding the elephant in the room aspect. Not hiding the issues, but saying, hey, this is a series of. This is knowledge and a series of technologies that we can use and that are important. And it's important that we tell our stories.
Yes, I agree. One thing, and you may have mentioned it, but I'm just going to ask anyway. One thing that you would change about our field, and one thing that you love it the way it is.
Okay. Oh, this is a good one. It's interesting because it's related to the other thing. The idea of what I would change. I think that the outreach and the exclusivity of the field, I think we need to deal with. It's interesting that until recently at least, most of the folklorists, the African American folklorists, are in universities, and there's still not a lot of public folklore. And I think that there needs to be a lot more folks outside the academy,
engaging people.
Engaging people. So I think that's an important thing. And actually, I mean, I love the discipline. I love things that I wouldn't change. I mean, the when I come to AFS. And I mean, there's so many really amazing sessions, so many different ways to go, with talking about folklore. And it's one of those fields where you can learn about all sorts of things. Sorry. Yeah, you can study all sorts of things that you're interested in, I mean, and I have, again, I've the Folklife Festival, being a curator at the Folklife Festival for so long, I've learned so much, gotten the opportunity to talk to so many people, not only traveled, but even, coming to the Folklife Festival. I wish that there were more folks coming, because I think that when people come to the festival, they get an opportunity to talk one-on-one about culture, about expressive culture, about history, about ethnoaesthetics, about all these things and about cultural representation that, and hear it from many points of view, because it's not only, I think that it's global. It's not only about, people of color, about the culture of Black people, but the culture globally that we share, I think that those connections are really, really important for us to learn. And one of the best ways to learn it is through the ways that we share the things that we create, whether it be sound, whether it be object, whether it be, all the ways that whether it be words, working with words, and stories. So I think that, these are the things that keep me so excited about the field.
It's great. You're brilliant. And I just want the fans, the audience, and everyone, other scholars, to understand that we're talking and you're in Senegal right now. That's how real it is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, the last question you kind of answered in that last answer, so I do not want to be redundant. I'm going to thank you so much for your time as the African American Folklorist of the Month, which, it's just an honor to speak to you. I really appreciate everything you've done to make room for folks like me.
Well, listen, I want to thank you and say that it's really an honor to get a chance to speak, the work that you're doing is so important, Lamont, that Pearlie, that it's so important to do exactly what we're talking about, to make sure that we know that we're in the field, to know that the field is an important one, to listen to other colleagues, and so I am, I feel really blessed to have had a chance to be in this conversation with you, and thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys know what it is.